While everybody's getting seated, I'm State Senator Lisa Boscola, Chair of the Senate Democratic Policy Committee. I want to thank my good friend and colleague, Senator Erickson, for working with us to schedule this important hearing today. He's the policy chair of the Republican caucus. While it may be very rare, very rarely do we jointly do policy meetings, Democrats and Republicans, this issue is just on the forefront of so many people's minds that we thought in the best interest of people in our community, it was good to see them in a bipartisan way, us working together on an issue that has been long overdue and needs a solution. Over the years, both Democrats and Republicans have worked tirelessly to cut and eliminate property taxes. So this is not a Democratic issue. It is not a Republican issue. There's plenty of common ground on property tax reform. Just weeks ago, even I was so proud of Senator Argel over here. He took part in a policy roundtable discussion in Lehighton on property tax relief. To his credit, Senator John Udicek, who requested that roundtable discussion be held there in Carbon County, insisted that Senator Argel be included, and Senator Argel was just so willing. Many of us, Republicans and Democrats, have co-sponsored Senate Bill 76, which would shift the property tax burden away from working families and seniors struggling on fixed incomes. I'm also encouraged by Senator Pileggi's support for a version of something similar, something like a property tax freeze for senior citizens. Together, taking this cooperation, this bipartisan effort, I'm confident that we can finally make property tax reform a reality. This session, I would prefer. Nearly everyone agrees that Pennsylvania's property tax system is outdated and unfair. The only real debate is how to go about devising a more equitable system. While all of us are frustrated with how little progress has been made on this issue over the years, I can tell you that I am more encouraged now than ever, because for a long time there was only maybe 3 or 4 or 5 co-sponsors of legislation on real property tax reform. Now we're up to 25, 26. So there's a lot of new faces in the General Assembly dealing with this issue, and an increasing number of them are on our side. Let me give you an example. About 15 years ago, I did introduce legislation. In fact, we had a special session on property tax relief, and it went nowhere, unfortunately. But at that time, we were lucky to get a handful of co-sponsors. Now we have up to 26, and I can just see the new energy, the enthusiasm for change, and I'm so appreciative of all of you that are here today testifying. I need your input. We need to know if 76 works. Maybe tweak it a little bit. I know that the IFO report came out and said there's some challenges there. What can we do to make it better so it finally passes in the legislature? So I'm going to stop saying anything anymore. Ted, you want to say something? And all the senators will introduce themselves, and then we'll start with Joel. Please do an introduction, maybe some brief comments, and then we'll get the whole roundtable discussion started.
Lisa, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to say much this morning. I'm simply going to turn it over to Dave Argel, Senator Argel, who is the prime sponsor of this bill, Senate Bill 76. Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you very much. The Reading paper yesterday talked about the fact that the first property tax in recorded history began in ancient Greece, like 500 BC. So I'm thinking that this debate has been going on now for almost 2,600 years. There has to be a better way to fund our public schools than the way that we do it today. Senator Fulmer always reminds us that the Constitution requires that we have a fair and equitable system. How anyone can look at the way we fund our schools today based on when did you build your house? Did you remember to fix the leak in your roof? When did you get it assessed? Did your school district spot reassess you? I mean, the current system makes no sense. And someday, if we don't fix this system, some judge somewhere is going to throw our current system in the trash can and write one system of their own. And so we're here today based on what we saw that day in Lehighton. I thought it was a very good interchange of ideas. We're here to hear what you like about the bill. We're here to listen to what you don't like about the bill. But please don't just give us your objections. What we really need to hear is your suggestions on how to end this awful problem once and for all. It's the #1 issue in the 6 counties that I represent. I can't go to a Cub Scout meeting without someone talking to me about property tax elimination. I told my caucus last week that in Hamburg I had to pull into a gas station for a tire that was starting to go flat on me, and I didn't say who I was, I didn't talk about anything, and the mechanic came out with a smile and said, yeah, I'll fix your tire as long as you do something about school property taxes. And so literally, I mean, it's everywhere in the 6 counties that I represent. As Senator Boscola had mentioned, we now have 26 co-sponsors for this property tax elimination bill. It's an old issue. We have never been this close, but I realize we still have a way to go. What is especially interesting, and this is completely accidental, we have 13 Republicans, we have 13 Democrats. You can't get more bipartisan than that. And so I want to thank Senator Boscola, I want to thank Senator Erickson for bringing us here today, and I'm very hopeful that something good comes out of this rather unusual joint policy committee. Thanks to both senators.
Joel, would you like to start?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Joel Rotz, excuse me, and I'm the Senior Director of State Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. We represent over 58,000 family members in the state of Pennsylvania. I guess a few words I would say for opening comments would certainly be that, you know, probably more longer than anyone else sitting before you, Farm Bureau has supported complete elimination of the property tax for decades. And in the past 30 years that we've been advocating it, of course, we've seen very little progression in that direction. And meanwhile, we continue to see the cost of public education inflate tremendously. I have a figure in front of me from the Commonwealth Foundation of 44% since 1996. And when we hear and look at what we're facing with the impending pension crisis, we can only expect that that is going to even further burden property taxpayers till we dig out of that hole. So I think that the time is now to move forward with the elimination of property tax. The time is to move forward with a proposal that will be based more on ability to pay. The idea that owning property is a sign of wealth and ability to pay these taxes, of course, is completely arcane, and that's where the real problem lies for farmers. Farmers, I think you all know, the land that we own costs very little for local government services and public education, and yet you know, pennies on the dollar to what farmers pay in property taxes, even with the Clean and Green program, which we are very, of course, appreciative for, that the legislature has implemented to help preserve our farms in the state of Pennsylvania. With that, I think I'll pass it on.
Hello, I'm Jason Horowitz, a consultant with Anderson Economic Group. Thank you so much for having me here today. I've been working with the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors for the last couple of years on this subject, and mainly they've come to me to ask about the numbers behind the subject. So my testimony will probably be much drier than most others' testimony here today. I testified before the Finance Committee last year about a similar bill, which actually fell short. Our numbers agreed with the IFO's numbers and found that at the state level, at least, the increase in taxes on one side would be about $2 billion short of how much they were promising to pay out to schools to replace property taxes. We looked at this bill a couple months before the IFO came out with their report and came out, and we had a similar result to the IFO this time around. And to summarize that result, I think it's important to emphasize that there's sort of two important components to these fiscal impacts. One is the solvency of the Education Stabilization Fund. That's the fund at the state level that will be taking in these new sales and income taxes and then paying out to the school districts to replace their property taxes that they can no longer levy. So the question is, will the increase in sales and income taxes at the state level be enough to cover those projected transfers to schools? So that's one piece. I think the second piece that's important to look at is what's going to happen to school districts. What property tax revenues might we expect in the future if this bill didn't go into place, and what will be the scale of the transfers from the state to replace those revenues? So the answer to the first question, based on our research and the IFO's research, is that the Education Stabilization Fund is indeed solvent. Within the first year, The IFO projects a surplus of a little over $300 million at the state level, and then within 5 years there would be an even greater surplus in that education stabilization fund. With schools, property taxes are expected to increase at a rate of about 4% per year over the next 5 years at the school district level without any change. So I have a graph in here that sort of shows the school's property taxes for operating costs raising from 11 to a little over $14 billion by the year 2019. Now, the transfers to schools from the state would be tied to inflation, so that would only increase at 2% per year. That would increase from about $11 to $12 billion over those 5 years. So schools would be receiving about $2 billion less in the form of property taxes or transfers from the state, although they would be able to implement a personal income tax at the district level under this reform. So that pretty much summarizes in a nutshell what our analysis was and what the IFO's analysis was. We largely are in agreement with their numbers.
Good morning. I want to thank Chairman Boscola and Chairman Erickson, members of the Senate Democratic and Republican Policy Committees for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Kim Skamanik, and I am the 2014 President of the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. I'm an associate broker, and I've been actively selling real estate in northeastern Pennsylvania for nearly 20 years. Our association, on behalf of its 28,000-plus members, urge you to support Senate Bill 76. Our association is committed to real property tax reform in the Commonwealth. Based on several surveys that were conducted for us by Keystone Analytics, a majority of Pennsylvania voters also support this legislation because it offers them real reform. We believe the bill will protect seniors on fixed incomes and fairly tax consumers in a responsible way. Throughout the Commonwealth, rising school property taxes have made it difficult for homeowners to pay their taxes. By eliminating the school property taxes and replacing the funding with personal income and sales taxes, the burden of unreasonably high property taxes would then be lifted from only homeowners and fairly spread among those who consume and earn the most. We've heard countless stories throughout the Commonwealth about homeowners unable to sell their homes because of the high property taxes, as well as buyers unable to purchase because they're being pushed out of the market. I'll share with you just one example. In Monroe County, homeowners struggle to find buyers for their homes. There's a home priced at $177,000 in East Stroudsburg. That would have a monthly mortgage payment of principal and interest of $762. But the monthly escrowed property taxes are $919. That brings the monthly payment to more than $1,600. Quite frankly, homeowners throughout the Commonwealth are simply tired of losing their homes due to school property taxes. In less than 2 months, our website, realreform76.com, has had nearly 14,000 visitors, has seen nearly 2,700 homeowners send emails to their senators asking them to support this bill, and 300 Pennsylvanians have shared their heart-wrenching stories about how rising school property taxes have caused them to lose their homes or have shut them out of the home buying process. As Jason mentioned, with the Anderson Economic Group and the work of the Independent Fiscal Office, Senate Bill 76 works. We showed that this offers a fiscally responsible plan for property tax reform. We also know, just like there is now in the Senate with the bipartisan support of this bill, there's bipartisan support among voters for statewide property tax reform. Keystone Analytics has conducted 2 surveys of voters for the association, and both have revealed that Pennsylvania voters want school property tax reform and that they believe it is the state's responsibility to control the exceedingly high property taxes. Surveys show a 2-to-1 public support of Senate Bill 76, with strong support coming from Democrats, Republicans, and independent voters alike. The association, as always, looks forward to working with the Senate to garner further support for this bill. Thank you.
Jason, before we move on, I wanted to indicate that David Baldinger is on the phone. He's from the Taxpayers Association. Is he on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do you have anything to say?
I certainly do, Senator, and thank you very much for inviting me to this hearing this morning. I'm sorry I couldn't make it in person. As you said, my name is David Baldinger, and I'm speaking today as a representative for the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. We're a grassroots, nonpartisan affiliation of 81 taxpayer groups from across the state that support Senate Bill 76, the Property Tax Independence Act. As Senator Argall mentioned, this past Sunday, the Running Eagle ran the first of a three-part series on the property tax problem called Lawmakers Look to Reform Property Taxes. I'd like to read two brief excerpts from the article. Linda Michalowski is 64. 2 years ago, when her employer eliminated her job as an administrative assistant, she decided to retire. She worked her entire adult life and has made extra mortgage payments on her house, which she has nearly paid off, and figured she was in pretty good financial shape. But now there's one big obstacle that's complicated her financial security. It's property taxes, said Michalowski. This year she'll pay $5,200 in taxes to the Schuylkill Valley School District, a number that keeps rising. I worked and I saved and I finally bought a home and I figured I'd spend the rest of my life. But with school taxes, I don't know if I can afford it much longer. Things are so tight for Michalowski that she keeps putting off home improvements such as repairs to her plumbing. The vacations she dreamed of are out of the question. Osborne Buchanan is 79. He worries that if he dies before his wife Diane does, she'll struggle to afford the nearly $5,000 in property taxes they're billed for each year. As I got older, I made it a goal to pay off the mortgage so she wouldn't have to worry about the house, the retired minister and chaplain said. But we still have this big tax burden. It's our largest single expense, and it goes up every year. Unfortunately, the problems stated in this article are far from unique. Many Pennsylvania homeowners are faced with the same difficulties, and these pleas will only continue to escalate in the future. As this hearing progresses, I hope I'll have a chance to make comments about the October Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office analysis of SB 76 that graphically illustrates the depth of the property tax problem. It demonstrates how stale, outdated proposals have been attempted in the past, like local tax swap options and targeted property tax relief, are not in any way capable of addressing the critical and damaging problem of runaway school property taxes. The Pennsylvania property tax system is irreparably broken and needs to be replaced now if our education system is to continue to be adequately funded and Pennsylvania homeowners are to be secure in their properties. The member groups of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations have understood this problem for many years, and it's one of the reasons we are working for the enactment of SB 76, legislation that will completely eliminate the hated and feared school property tax. But the main reason we are so passionate in our support of the Property Tax Independence Act is that it is our legislation. Since November 2010, the Coalition has been a full partner in the crafting of Senate Bill 76. In a state that has no taxpayer initiative and referendum, we have been given a unique opportunity to collaborate in writing legislation that forever solves the problem of runaway school property taxes and relieves homeowners of this crushing burden, offers a massive stimulus to Pennsylvania's economy, promotes job growth in a state where jobs are sorely needed, and at the same time guarantees adequate funding of our children's education. The PCTA is grateful to the members of the Senate Republican and Democrat policy committees for the opportunity to participate in this discussion and to give a voice to the grassroots supporters who are working so hard to make the Property Tax Independence Act a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Jason.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Jason Screenack. I'm a principal with an accounting firm here in central Pennsylvania, McConnelly and Asbury. I head up our state and local tax practice. In addition to this role, I'm also chair of the State Tax Committee for the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs, representing over 20,000 members. My role here today is to kind of give the view from our members' perspective, as well as taking a look at upholding public interest with regards to this proposal. I'm all for property tax reform. I think it's long overdue. I deal with it from annually with my mother, looking at how much she's paying and how she can try to keep up with it. But I want to be financially responsible as well with regards to the proposal. And I think that we should be focusing more on those who need the reform the most, those that have the greatest cause of concerns, individuals like my mother, senior citizens working part-time jobs. I think taking a look at the property tax rebate's a great start, looking to expand that program, because that is an area that is actually specifically providing for some relief for the individuals that need it most. When I talk about having financial concerns with regards to this. Kind of take a look at two parts of the Independent Fiscal Office report. The first being the net fiscal impact of the House bill. Under the first year, they see no discernible change, but the next 4 years, they're looking at approximately a $3 billion cumulative shortfall with regards to funding. The more scary part is under a historical perspective of what this would entail. One second. Had it earmarked here. They looked from 2002, 2003 historical information through 2012, 2013, and the impact of this, the cumulative impact over this time period would be close to $15 billion shortfall. So that causes a great amount of concern for me. I want to make sure that Pennsylvania remains a great place to live, a great place for companies to come and do business, and to grow Pennsylvania in that perspective. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Erickson, Senator Boscola, and all your colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today. My name's Deborah Musselman. I represent the Pennsylvania News Media Association. I beg your pardon. We've appeared before this panel and others in the past on this proposal because we have very serious problems raised by the bill. The newspaper industry actually under this legislation is singled out for two new taxes. The tax on our circulation revenue as well as the tax on advertising. I've brought with me today, and your staff has packets of information that basically summarize the serious problems that we have with this. We believe that singling out newspapers for a sales tax on the product, it would turn the carriers into tax collectors for the state. That's a lot of retirees, and that's a lot of people say, really? But a lot of boys and girls between the age of 11 and 18 still deliver papers, and I know a lot of you did as well. Single copy sales, news racks, cannot be revised to add the sales tax, so our membership would have to either absorb that price. Well, we're not sure what they would do, but we do know that it would reduce sales, reduce revenue, and basically be a counterproductive measure. The other element of the bill that we find so worrisome is the tax on advertising, especially newspaper advertising. Attached to my testimony that you'll have are some printouts of the results of a study conducted by the economic forecasting firm IHS Global Insight. They did a number of studies between 2005 2010 for every state to calculate the impact of an advertising tax. No other state in the country, by the way, taxes advertising. Florida tried it in 1999 and repealed it less than a year later. It was a regulatory nightmare. Based on the 2008-9 update, which is the most recent one that I have for you, a tax on advertising in Pennsylvania alone, the projection would be 64,000 jobs lost, and $14 billion in lost sales also is projected because of the cumulative wave effect, so to speak, of this economic activity throughout our economy. So although these numbers, you know, the study was conducted by Global Insight on behalf of the Newspaper Association of America in conjunction with the National Advertising Association. These numbers, of course, need to be updated, but I would like to emphasize that they're based on the way our economy, our economic structure operates and continues to operate to this day. So we believe that they are still quite valid. That's really the crux of our concern, and again, I appreciate your invitation. Thank you. Thanks.
Good morning. Senator Brascola and Senator Erickson and members of the committees, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Sharon Ward. I'm the director of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, based here in Harrisburg. As we approach the issue of property tax reform, I think it's important that every conversation discuss two aspects. The first is the issue of property taxes and the impact on taxpayers, and the second is an important goal, which is the need to preserve and maintain a very high-quality system of public education here in the Commonwealth. Because when we talk about the Commonwealth's future, that future is built on public education. There's nothing that is more tied to the strength of our economy. So I have a sort of I'm going to go through very quickly. I always bring pictures, and I will go through slides very, very quickly for you just to make a couple of introductory comments. I'm going to talk at 30,000 feet and also say things that probably you're not hearing from your constituents. The first is that while property taxes are high for some people, and in some places they are not universally high in Pennsylvania. In fact, the opposite is true. If you look at the first slide, property taxes in general as a share of personal income, which is an affordability measure, we are below the national average in property taxes. The national average is 3.31%. Pennsylvania is 3.07%. You can see our neighbors have much higher property taxes, New Jersey and New York. And both of those have much higher personal incomes than Pennsylvania does. And certainly we're just a little bit higher than Maryland. I've also provided you a spreadsheet or a table that you can look at that shows by school district, by county, property taxes as a share of personal income. So you can look at a variety of things. One is you can see that there are many counties and many school districts where property taxes using this affordability measure are not high at all. The second and third slides show property taxes as a share of personal income by county. You can see that the vast majority are under 4% of personal income. Actually, the majority are under 3% of personal income. And by school districts, it's similar. So most people are paying as a share of their personal income, or as represented for affordability as a whole for the districts, less than 3%. So it's important to note that as you're crafting solutions to the property tax problem, I believe that it's important that they be targeted rather than universal, because the problem does not exist everywhere. There are places where people are paying 1% or as a whole in school districts, property taxes are 1 or 1.5% of personal income. The second, so I would ask you also to think back on who's calling you about this. Is it everyone? Is it working families? Or are you mostly getting calls from people in certain communities and from senior citizens? Because it's pretty clear that there are some communities that have high property taxes and that some seniors have difficulty paying. The second issue I want to raise with you is simply this question. I can tell you, having just come back from a meeting with our comparable organizations across the country, that property taxes are universally disliked across the country. However, you also have to ask the question, why, after 20 years, is Michigan the only state that's ever taken the step to eliminate property taxes? I think that's a valid question. Property taxes have been on the political agenda and on the policy agenda in every state in the country. No one has taken this step, and you have to ask why. And really, there are probably two reasons, maybe three. I think the first is you can see in the Independent Fiscal Office report, and I have the slides there, that the costs, there are really problems with elimination. One of them is that under this plan, we're looking at in 5 years about a $2.6 billion reduction in school funding from current law. So that's the first thing. And while it is true that, as was indicated earlier, the funding proposal would raise almost sufficient funds, maybe $1 billion less, the funds aren't distributed to school districts, and that's a critical problem here. So there's been $1 billion, $850 million in cuts, which many of you have had to address in your own school districts. Imagine what that would be if there were $2.5 billion in cuts. The other problem has been identified is the problem of volatility in the types of tax revenue. Personal income taxes and sales taxes are very volatile. So if you look at the slide that says annual growth rates, also from the independent office, fiscal office, 3 points, or 2 points there. One is the other taxes are quite volatile. And the second, if you look at the property tax line, which is the light blue line, you see that the annual growth rate in property taxes is actually going down. And why is that? It's because of Act 1. So the steps that you've taken have already moderated property tax increases. They haven't eliminated them, but according to the data, the property tax increases have been moderated by Act 1. Third reason why this is problematic is really, I think you have to look at what the impact was in California. And California didn't eliminate its property taxes, but it capped them at 2%, both local and school property taxes. And what you had there was really two things. One is three things, a giant housing bubble. The property tax payments that individuals would have made went not into savings in the economy, but ran up housing prices. So instead of paying $300 or $400 a month in property taxes, that went into paying mortgages. So there really weren't very many savings. And secondly, it meant that there were fees for absolutely everything, so that people ended up paying more, particularly for schools, but also for other municipal services. So I think that I'll stop there. I think there are a number of solutions that can get to addressing the very real concerns that have been raised about affordability of property taxes. But I would hope that you'd be open to something other than property tax elimination.
Hey, good morning, Senators. My name is John Callahan. I'm with the Pennsylvania School Board Association. We represent over 3,000 elected members that you're very familiar with and probably talk to on a regular basis. These members are really charged with, in essence, sticking up for the kids in our public schools. And that's really their main concerns. And that's what's the beauty of working for the Pennsylvania School Board Association, is that I get to stick up every day for the school, the kids that are in our schools, in our public schools. First thing I want to kind of make clear is that the pressures on school budgeting is something that every school board director is very, very astute to. And that's simply because we have a lot of different pressures, from mandates, special education mandates, to the state funding formula and how state funding is pushed out and every budget that we deal with, how much money is coming down to the local districts, and how that affects education. Let's face it, you have to pay teachers, we have to put on the lights, and we have to make schools operate. So that costs some money. And I guess the electricity in the room costs some money too. But I think, from that standpoint, schools do cost money, and how we pay for them is very important. We have these pressures. We have the state funding, we have mandates, we have pensions coming up. Obviously, pensions is increasing, is something that we're talking about and you are very much aware of. We also have the increased cost, just the general increased cost of education in the Commonwealth. And that comes from teacher salaries, that comes from just the different standards that we have to meet every year to kind of make sure our students are getting the proper education. So that's our pressures on school board members. And it just so happens that the school board members also have one of the biggest responsibilities, and one that many times the public happens in the public eye and is very difficult for many of my members, and that's to increase taxes on property tax. And they're very, very aware of that, they have that challenge. And Act 1 obviously is something that made that a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, they don't take it lightly, property tax increases. And they don't take that responsibility lightly. And they don't take the responsibility of having to take care of our kids at all lightly. I think over the past few weeks, I've had the pleasure of meeting them, and it's been fantastic. So we have those challenges out there. When we're coming down to this plan, and when it comes down to property taxes, we understand that property taxes obviously is a very consistent and standard piece of revenue for schools to pay for. It's something we can rely on, but it's also something that is not exactly the greatest source of funding right now. And we're also seeing our state funds go down. So we have those challenges. And if we're going to go forward and do property tax reform, we would encourage, and there are several things I would encourage, that we don't completely eliminate property tax reforms, that you have a mix. That if you're going to keep property taxes, they provide a consistent base. And if we're looking at property taxes, there's this big elephant in the room that many people don't mention, and that's the assessment reform. Assessment reform will get us a long way. I know it's the third rail of politics and very difficult to deal with, and I'm very honest about that. I've seen it in my own county where commissioners that actually put in assessment reform were no longer commissioners after that. And it's true, and we've had several court cases go forward on assessment reform and have pushed it forward, but no real movement on that. We've had some counties that have been, I guess, over 70 years without an assessment, and some that actually do it on a regular basis, and that makes it, again, fair and equitable. I guess I'll use that term from the Constitution as well. Now, I guess another point, and I apologize if I'm hopping everywhere, but when we're talking about fair and equitable, we have a school funding formula that many people, even a special education funding formula that many people recognize is not exactly fair and equitable. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and I think that's an entire hearing to itself. It probably could take up another 2 hours, and probably could take up another 25 hours of solid work on it in order to get maybe a compromise. So that's a long-term strategy that I would also encourage people to work on. There's a bill in the House that starts an examination committee. There's been a lot of work on it. But I'd encourage, as a side note, after this hearing for people to kind of look at the school funding formula and take a good hard look at how that money is done. I know that you are very familiar with it. But there's a lot of work that has to be done there as well to get the money out to our schools fair and equitably. Again, when we're looking at property taxes, and you look to shift it to other things, like the PIT, like sales tax, you obviously have to rely on taxes, as Sharon had pointed out, that are unstable when it comes down to the pressures of the economy. In a bad economy, they go up sometimes. In a bad economy, they go down, actually, sometimes unpredictable. And I think that when it comes to school funding, our school board directors are looking for a predictable source that they can rely on, that they can budget on. Every business has to deal with budgets. And when we are running one of the largest businesses in the state, I'd say schools themselves, we rely on budgets that are consistent on the revenue end. So we have another challenge there as well in this proposal. It's not that we're opposed directly to property tax reform. It's a matter of our number one chief priority, which is getting the money out and getting the money spent on our students and our kids in our schools. So I admit I come with one big bias, which is getting the money and getting funds to students. And having that as my primary goal, I look, of course, to changes, and my association looks to changes that are in the best interest of school students in the Commonwealth, and ones that give us a stable budget and ones that give us adequate, equitable, and fair funding for schools. So I guess with that in mind, with that grass tops, I guess you could say, statement, I look forward to the discussion, and thank you very much for inviting us here today and being part of this discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Warren Hudak, Chairman of the NFIB's Tax Subcommittee. I'm a small business owner. I own a regional accounting firm. We provide payroll, accounting services, tax services to small businesses. The cornerstone of NFIB's tax positions over the years has been very consistent. We support simplification in all forms, and we strive for fairness. So we get the point that no one should be, and not just seniors, struggling households should never be kicked out of their house because they can't afford to pay the tax bill. But we have to be careful of what we wish for because we just might get it. And part of our trouble with some of the points of this bill is the fact we're moving from local control to centralized control of tax collection. And there is a fourth rail of politics, and that's school funding. We currently use a school funding formula for state money that was devised in 1993. We've got school districts whose student populations have dropped by a half, and their funding has maintained the same amount year after year, where other school districts have doubled in population, and they're still getting the same amount. Fundamental to this discussion is how we spend the money and where we give the money to. And before we can talk about collecting money, we have to talk about how we're spending money and how we're giving the money out. And it is the fourth rail, and we're not talking about it. Sure, there's assurances today that after this bill's passed, after we figure out a way to broaden the tax base, change the way we're taxing people and increase revenue, that will address the funding later. What we would like to see is today, let's talk about how we're funding. Let's change that 1993 formula. Let's bring it up to date. Let's let the money that we've designated to funding schools represent the student populations of those schools. We shouldn't just be writing blank checks. It's not responsible tax policy to do that, but that's sort of what we're doing here. We're putting the cart before the horse, and that's something that we feel very strong about, very passionate about. Talking about how we're doling out the money first, talking about the spending first, then we can talk about the collecting of money. There's a lot of ways we can save struggling households to stay in their houses without having to fundamentally change the way we have taxes. Second, fundamental to this is a tax shift. There's no question seniors in certain classes of our population consume less taxable goods than others. Businesses, by far, consume more taxable goods than any other taxpayer we have in the Commonwealth. Young working families, they're buying soccer balls and hockey sticks. Seniors are buying prescriptions, and their lifestyles are much different. They're not consuming the way young households are. They're not consuming the way businesses are. And that's something we have to consider. To say that it makes it more fair, it's true. From this simple standpoint is we just don't want people who can't afford their tax bill to be kicked out of their house. Is this the best way to remedy that? I'm not exactly sure. Then third is the technical aspect of this. We heard from the Newspaper Association, their unique problem in the way they operate their business and how it would be difficult to comply with this law. Well, we've expanded the tax base to increase multiple the number of transactions a business will have to process will go up exponentially. Well, even some of those transactions are going to be treated differently. Wow, what a layer of complexity that is. It's one thing to say, look, if you make $100, we're going to tax you 6%. But that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is something fundamentally different, something fundamentally more complex. We've got certain transactions that are going to be taxed differently depending on how much the transaction is. For a small business owner who can't afford programmers, complicated computer systems, to start a small business today, sometimes just affording QuickBooks is a struggle. We have guys cashing in their 401ks to pay their payroll. The last thing they need is a whole layer of complications. They need to wake up every day and decide, how can I bake a better cheesecake to beat my competitors? Not, how do I put together this complex system and comply with, and do all the documentation that's required here? Sure, we need tax simplification. This sounds good, but there is a lot of details here that still are unresolved. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Good morning. My name is Gene Barr, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Chamber is the largest broad-based business advocacy group in Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank Senator Erickson, Senator Boscoli, other members here for the opportunity to talk a bit about this issue. A lot of what I have here has been referenced. I want to go through a few things very quickly. First is, you might guess, we're here because we do oppose these proposals. In fact, we are part of a broad-based business coalition that has come out. There was a letter that was sent out a couple of months ago on this. I want to run through quickly some of the organizations, some of them represented here, who oppose these various proposals. In addition to our organization, Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, Pennsylvania Retailers Association, National Federation of Independent Business, Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association, Manufacturer and Business Association, Pennsylvania Bar Association, Philadelphia Bar Association, Pennsylvania Newspaper Association, Broadband Cable Association, the Pennsylvania Petroleum Association, and the Pennsylvania Defense Institute. In addition to that, most recently, was an organization, it's a national organization, trade organization relative to taxes called the Council on State Taxation. They've sent a letter out that expresses strong reservations about these proposals as well, and I think that's important to note. The largest reason we're against this is one of the more obvious ones, which is, from our perspective, it simply shifts the cost from residential taxpayers onto the business side. And in fact, I wanted to reference something that Sharon Ward mentioned, I agree with, that we hear this very sporadically. When I talk to businesses across Pennsylvania as I travel the state, in certain places I will hear from people, gee, I have a problem with property taxes. In other places, their concerns are other types of taxes or other issues entirely. So I would agree that it certainly is a sporadic issue. And we've heard the term reference controlling taxes. This, from our perspective, really doesn't control taxes. It, as I mentioned, our concern is it shifts taxes. And we understand the reason for this. You've heard much of the angst over property taxes. We understand that. Our view is that what we need to do is address those things that have driven property taxes. If we believe they're too high, address those issues that, in fact, have driven property taxes too high. There's a number of them, but I will mention two quickly. One of them is I know this body is actively looking at, which is pension reform, which is threatening to gobble up not only state tax dollars, but local as well as school district tax dollars. The other one is prevailing wage, which we've gotten no changes on. We had some moderate, very modest change as a result of the transportation bill, but only on transportation issues. And it's one of those when you talk to, I know I've talked to local government folks as well as school district people who talk about what this does to their budgets as well. So our concern is that until we fix those things that indeed are driving property taxes higher, that it makes no sense to figure out and try and shift those taxes along. One of the other comments is that people say, well, geez, businesses will be able to take advantage of this because they pay property taxes. Not all businesses pay property taxes. Many of my members lease their property, and any relief they might get, and I say might get, might come many years down the road. If we want to, and this has been talked about as well, if we want to focus on who truly needs this, we are wholly supportive of looking at some type of means testing. I'll be perfectly honest. To look at a blanket lifting of property taxes off household incomes that may be in the millions of dollars and shift that burden to us makes no sense. We want to look at the widower who is desperately in need of some type of reform. I think that that's completely appropriate and is well worthwhile for this body to take a close look at, and we would be very supportive of whatever assistance we could provide to that. Finally, let me just mention one last thing. I'm a native of Pennsylvania. I had left the state for a few years and came back. Unfortunately, what we find as I go across Pennsylvania is we just don't have enough of that. We all know, and we're all familiar with young people who have gone to our educational institutions and left the state. As I talk to my members, there is a dearth of qualified people to work the jobs that they have available. I know that's sometimes difficult to believe in this economy, but it's absolutely true, and I hear it every day. The concern that I have personally as a native Pennsylvanian is this. If we take the burden away from those who may be able to afford it, even though they may be elderly, and shift that onto, say, young families starting out with a higher personal income tax, with changing some sales tax exemptions when they buy clothes and shoes for their kids, and at the same time put a greater burden on the employers who hopefully will hire these young people, my concern is that we make Pennsylvania a little less hospitable to the young people that we need to stay and grow our economy. So I'd ask you to keep that in mind as we look at this. Thanks very much for the time today.
We thank all of you for being here this morning, and obviously we have a wide range of opinion on this bill, which I think is a good thing. Let me mention a couple of other things that really people haven't talked about. We impose on the school districts a number of unfunded mandates. A number of these unfunded mandates are passed down to us from the federal government. It comes to mind, of course, the special education and No Child Left Behind. We are trying to deal through the Special Education Commission with the fairness within that funding stream. But it has been mentioned here this morning that perhaps the school funding formula needs to be changed. And this is a discussion I've had with Senator Argel, that yes, we can impose ways to raise money, but until we come to grips with the inequities in that funding formula, we are, in my opinion, humble opinion, still going to fail. One of my colleagues, Senator Yaw, raises a number of other issues. These are the contracts, what we do with those, how we account for building that's going to be necessary in some of the growing districts. So there are then a number of unanswered issues that we need to deal with. But let me simply end by saying this is a multifaceted, complex problem, and the ideas that have been presented by each of you today, we need to take a look at, we need to analyze, and then I think after that, discuss this still a bit further. I'm sure Senator Argel looks forward to that.
Senator, you notice no one in the room argued in favor of the status quo. The disagreement, of course, is how we fix it. No one argues that we should allow the current system to continue to force good people out of their homes. That is simply, inconceivable, I think, for anyone. And perhaps the one key question that we need to address at some point is how much is enough? This bill, as put together by David Baldinger and Representative Cox and 81 different taxpayer groups, I think has an interesting proposal. We're going to replace what school districts get dollar for dollar. And then next year, we're going to give them more based on a formula. And the year after that, we're going to give them more. And the year after that, we're going to give them more. And yet, we hear this talk of a possible shortfall because we're not going to give them as much as they could get if they continued to raise property taxes year after year after year. And that's the whole reason we're in this room, is because they continue to raise property taxes year after year after year. Sharon, this chart with the different school districts is very instructive. It's the first time I've seen it, and I think it helps me to understand why perhaps I am hearing so much of it in the 6 counties that I represent. But if indeed we need to control the spending, I think giving them what they have today with a cost of living adjustment year after year after year is reasonable, because right now, and certainly until Act 1, the sky was the limit, as much as the local constituency was willing to bear. And so I guess we heard probably more objections than possible solutions, but I would suggest to all of you that if you have an amendment to this bill, get it to me in the next week, because our goal is to move this legislation ahead early next year. And so we're going to need some specific suggestions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Chairman.
This is supposed to be a dialogue between those that might have concerns on 76. What can we do to improve it? Because there's a lot of senators here with questions. I want you, if you can think of something outside the box, because there is a big problem here, and that has to get addressed. And for some people to say, well, the way that archaic system of 100 years, I think you pointed out that 1993 was when we did the funding formula. Well, this is a taxing system that's antiquated by 100 years or so. So we do have a big problem. And as we're leaving today, think. And if anybody has an idea, we're more than willing to figure out how to handle it. Now, somebody said, well, we can't eliminate property taxes solely. The problem that you have with some of us in that mindset is if you don't eliminate property taxes and you go to a sales and income, what happens with the property tax? You have a sales income and a property tax, and the property tax keeps rising every year? That is unacceptable to taxpayers. That's why the bill calls for an elimination with a replacement of 2 taxes in which the people paying is much more broad, right? Because if you're just a property owner, you're paying this tax. But if you're buying things, even if you're making money under the table, even all that illegal money. We don't get those people, but we can get them when they buy things, because, you know, people do buy things. So the amount of, the pool of people paying into the system gets bigger, and I think that's what we're trying to accomplish, the equity side of it. I know Senator Fulmer had a question, and Farnese, and Judy, and Udicek. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and you're right, this is a dialogue, and we're looking for solutions. We're looking to this is going to be a problem. I know, Sharon, you stated that it's not that big of a problem in the state of Pennsylvania as compared to other states and so forth, but if it's not a problem, and I realize this is from Western Berks, but this is the August 13th edition, August 14th edition of the Greater Reading Western Berks edition of the Merchandiser, and folks, I can show you that's page after page after page of tax sales. Now, they may not be the statistics, but these are real people. These are real people that are being forced to sell their homes. Now, they may not all be because of property taxes and that they cannot afford them. Maybe and such, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this is a problem, and we got to stop shrinking the pool. We're going to be talking about, clean and green is necessary. Joe, I'm all about it, and we need it, but that shrinks the pool. We start freezing it for seniors, that's going to shrink the pool. And then we're going to start making even more winners and losers. I've heard some things talked about that the IFO shows it doesn't add up, but I think Jason from the Anderson Economic Group, if you look at his report and you look at the IFO report, the numbers do work. They are there. The question is, are we going to be afraid to do it, because this would be, yes, I admit, the largest tax shift in Pennsylvania state history, and that does create some fear. I understand that. But what we need to be doing is, and as Senator Boscola so eloquently pointed out, that we're trying to just push the pool out, to spread the cost of our education to more people, and to those people that have students in schools and such. I'm pro-business, Gene, and MIFB. You guys are my heroes. I come from small business. And I wouldn't want to burn, but when you lose your home, something that is part of the American dream, isn't it? Isn't that what this nation was founded on? To own property? And not to get corny here, but if you look at Article 1, Section 1 of our state constitution, it is so clear. It says that we have an inalienable and indefeasible right to acquire, to possess, and protect our properties. How can you acquire your property if the tax burden is so high that you're not going to be able to partake in that American dream? How can you possess it and keep it and protect your reputation if that tax burden becomes so burdensome that you're going to give up that which is yours? These other taxes that we're talking about shifting to, whether it's sales taxes and the increase of PIT, we did so because we were trying to make this as bipartisan as possible. We were trying to make sure we were protecting the working poor. And such. But the user's fee side of it, the sales tax side of it is, if I don't need to buy a gallon of gas and I'm not driving, I'm not going to pay that tax. But if I'm going to use that vehicle, I'm going to pay that tax. So I believe this is a way that a person can acquire and possess and protect their property, something that is theirs, and they could at least have a place to live. Now, as far as getting the costs under control from the business community, Warren, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. We need to look at the spending side of it. That's very, very important. And let me just address that, and then I'm going to shut up. I believe this bill does address it, because I believe this bill addresses the increases by making sure that we are living within our means. We're going to keep it within the rate of inflation compared to population growth, if I'm correct, or the increases going forward. And so I think it's a start. Now, as far as the funding formulas go going forward, that is a very, very, very important part. And that is something that needs to be looked at. But my fear is if we do nothing to shift this tax burden, we as a legislative body will do nothing to deal with those much needed improvements in the funding formulas. And As the chairman, majority chair of the State Education Committee, I will tell you, and I'm already speaking to other colleagues, that I would love to put together a bill that would create a general education funding commission, just as we've done with the Special Education Funding Commission, to address that very important need. But right now, I think the thing is that we've gotten so close with this. We have 26 co-sponsors, 13 Republicans, 13 Democrats, and we're looking for the solutions. I've heard all the arguments. I think that debate, we don't need that debate any longer. I think what we need to be looking at is what are the solutions to make this bill, Dave, to put us over the top. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Boscola. Just a point to you, Senator Fulmer, and we've talked about this before. I have state resolution right now in the committee, State Resolution 184, that looks at school funding and puts forward a commission that would study this issue and give us a real, we really don't have a formula, that's the truth. What we have is a hodgepodge and something that's been built on top of, other funding initiatives that's created a real problem for us as far as funding goes. I would only say, first of all, that I don't believe we can't look at school funding and do this at the same time. I think we're capable of doing more than one thing at a time in the state legislature. So I think that's something that we absolutely have to get rolling on. I've always felt that unless we address the spending side, we are not going to reach a solution on this that works. In terms of the impacts on small business, I would say, I hear from a lot of small business people that do support this. I hear from teachers who support this idea. They're real people. There are people that are facing property tax issues as well. And as far as, just impacting elderly seniors, I'd ask everybody to look at the demographics of Pennsylvania and the class of people that is moving forward into the baby boomer generation, if you will, that are going to be retiring and facing maybe 30, 40 years of retirement. This is a recipe for disaster because you can save an awful lot. You may not have a pension, but considering, all of the factors and the spending choices that people have to make, it's very, very difficult to live your life with a certain standard of living over that period of time, considering the property tax issue that we're facing right now. That's one of the chief reasons why I think we absolutely have to fix this, because this is what Pennsylvania is. And we also need to look at younger generations and keeping them here. And part of keeping them here is not just the cost of housing, it's also having businesses that hire people, that, that actually want to be here and expand in Pennsylvania. We have a lot to offer. I'll finally say that we need to work on this. I think the very fact that all of you are sitting here indicates that you understand that there is a problem. I didn't hear anybody say that there's no problem. You have concerns, and I think they're valid concerns, but they're not enough to keep us from doing what we need to do to resolve this problem. And I'm hopeful that, as we look at this bipartisan group of individuals here, and also at business and nonprofit leaders and associations that have a role or a stake in this, that you'll come to the table too with solutions. That's what we need. Don't just let this die of its own weight. Let's get some kind of a solution. People have been waiting too long, and I think that's part of the reason people get so angry about the legislative process, because we've talked and talked about this, and we never seem to be able to come to some solution, or at least something that will get us to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Boscola, Senator Erickson, for bringing together Democrat and Republican senators to address this very important issue, and I appreciate the testimony of everybody that was here today. One issue that I'll focus on, and perhaps folks on the panel could respond to it, there's no question this is about more than a tax issue. This is about the quality of education in Pennsylvania. No greater investment does Pennsylvania make in terms of its economic future, in terms of the quality of life in our communities, the quality of life that our families in Pennsylvania hope to achieve is in most cases one when we make an investment in education. And it's clear from the charts that have been presented when you see that Pennsylvania is ranked 47th in state share, 8th in its over-reliance on local taxes, that we are not meeting that standard of making that investment. And what frustrates me, and I think I heard it today, that one of the concerns that we've heard raised about Senate Bill 76 is that it will centralize taxation. Well, I can't imagine that a system that has 500 different property tax rates across our 67 counties is a good system. We're in the 21st century. We are a commonwealth. We are in this together. We need to share that burden of investment. We need to make that investment as a commonwealth. It's a shame that the quality of education is going to be determined on whether or not you got lucky enough to live in a wealthy district and you're on the right side of the funding formula. We need to make those broader changes. Many of the driving forces to higher taxes at the local level, pensions, special education mandates, mostly from the federal government, or beyond local control. The pension bill, the General Assembly passed that pension bill, and now local taxpayers are going to have to pay the bill. So the issue of local control, the issue of centralization, I really don't think is a fair argument. The idea that we're going to have 500, if you're talking to a business, a CEO, anywhere in the country, and you tell them you're going to go to Pennsylvania, you're going to have 500 different tax rates depending on where you locate your business, that's not good for the economy, that's not good for the taxpayer. I want to also touch on another point in terms of changing the housing stock, and I'm glad that the realtors are here. I represent the anthracite region in northeastern Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, for the past 48 straight months, we've had the highest unemployment in Pennsylvania. We have chronic underemployment. Our housing stock still reflects the mining industry. We haven't been able to turn over that housing stock. So you take a city like Wilkes-Barre, or many of the other third-class cities, Hazleton, Nanticoke, and Pittston, fighting the same battle, being hollowed out in terms of their economy and their main streets and their neighborhoods, because they can't turn over that housing stock. When you see in Carbon County, that was referenced by the realtors, where your mortgage payment is less than your property tax payment, that's very hard to turn over that house. So it is a big part of our economy. I think it's important to have discussions. There's no question this is going to be an exercise of that great phrase, this is the art of the possible, not the perfect. So I would appreciate any comments that you have, particularly on that issue of centralization and the idea that we have this fragmented delivery of our property tax system here in Pennsylvania. I think the School Board Association hit on it. Just look to the reassessment system. We wanted to have local control. We're going to let it up to the counties. Well, that system is inherently flawed. We did a study a few years ago, Legislative Budget and Finance, to look at places like Maryland that have a statewide system of reassessment. We looked at other issues. This system, not only is it unfair, it is holding back the Pennsylvania economy, and it's holding back our kids in the educational system. So it's an important debate. It's a broad debate. It's a complex debate. But I appreciate Senators Erickson and Boscola bringing us together to have this conversation. I think we need to continue the dialogue and find a way to better fund our schools and unleash the economy, not just in certain regions of Pennsylvania, but across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boscola. And again, I want to echo the comments of my other colleagues here today and applaud Senators Boscola, Senator Erickson for their leadership on this issue. And I also want to applaud those folks. When I look at the co-sponsorship memo, I think someone said there's about 26 folks already that have supported or in support of the bill in its current form. I think that's critical, and I think that's very important too. That it shows the leadership and the advocacy of these folks, whether they're in the House or the Senate. I see some of my colleagues here today that have been battling this issue for years, and I applaud them, and I applaud the ability of Senators Boscola and Senator Erickson, and of course Senator Argel, in getting together this coalition and getting this issue to the forefront, because so like Senator Udicek said, there is nothing more critical, nothing more important than finding a solution to ensuring that our children, our greatest asset, has each and every opportunity to succeed and to give them the skill sets they need. And I do think that Senator Swank is right, is that the two issues are certainly intertwined. They are one and the same. Discussing a fair alternative to the property tax system we have right now, the funding formula for the school district. So at least I begin to sort of look at the bill and really sort of get down into the details, and I think that's an essential part of any legislative process. So, and of course, like I said, I applaud everyone's ideas. I applaud what the suggestions and the idea of having this discussion. But there's just maybe a couple of things that I'd like to sort of point out for folks, and maybe either today or as we move forward, because I will tell you I intend to get extremely involved, heavily involved in this issue moving forward after today. If we could maybe comment on this or moving forward. So the first thing I just want to take a look at, and just looking at this from the point of view of the city of Philadelphia, okay? So when I take a look at it, there's a couple documents I do want to point out. Number one was I guess a August 1st, 2013 report from the Majority Appropriations Committee, the Senate Majority Appropriations Committee. Executive Director Jordan, he notes that Senate Bill 76, of course, would eliminate the Philadelphia wage tax relief. And I think everybody here understands the way that Philadelphia addresses wage tax issues. The Taxpayer Relief Act addresses Philadelphia different than the rest of the state, and we know that we deal with the wage tax issues as opposed to property tax relief. So this report says actually something I find troubling. It says that Senate Bill 76 would eliminate the Philadelphia wage tax relief provided by Chapter 7 to the tune of $86 million. And it could trigger, and this is not my language, it's the Senate Majority Executive Director's language, could trigger an increase in the wage tax for residents and non-residents because the city would no longer be receiving a tax reduction allocation under the Act. So that's point number one. So I look at this and I say, could the city of Philadelphia really increase, or could wage tax really increase in the city of Philadelphia under this language, number one. So then I also took a look at, and I think Mr. Horowitz and I think Ms. Skumanek from the Realtors mentioned the IFO report, and I think that's a very good report to take a look at. I think it's very interesting, because when I took a look at the IFO report, Independent Fiscal Office, they did a report dated October 1st. They did an analysis of 76 and House Bill, Senate Bill 76, House Bill 76. It says, I have a hard time, this is from the IFO, it says, they point out that the analysis shows a loss, and this is, again, another troubling fact, and this is significant, a loss of over $300 million to the city of Philadelphia between the wage tax reduction funding loss and the non-property school district tax that will no longer be allowed to be levied. As you know, the city of Philadelphia is no longer able to sort of do what folks up here have always said, help yourself, find ways to sort of help yourself. Cigarette tax, drink tax, whatever it might be, we're going to not have the ability to do that anymore. So, of course, I'm concerned that a school district already who suffers significant financial difficulties right now, we're looking at, are they going to be able to take another $300 million loss in revenue looking forward? And the third issue, and I'll end with this, I think is a point I think brought up by the realtors and their little mailer that they've been sort of sending around. It's very nice and colorful. And it basically talks about the relief for the seniors. But I think, Mr. Hudak, I think you sort of pointed it out, I think Mr. Barr sort of pointed this out, is that when I look at this, I sort of question, and again, this is just my own opinion, I'm looking for answers from you folks. Will the bill really help the lion's share of Pennsylvania seniors who are now going to have to pay for more money for food, for medical services, for funeral-related goods, for legal and other professional services? I know that I believe that an exemption from the Act is realtors' service. They're not taxed, I think, under the Act. I know legal services are, and I think other services are as well too. And then arts and culture, trips to the zoo, seniors that may want to enjoy those benefits of life right now are going to see new taxes in different areas. So again, I mean, I'm not using this as a criticism. I think I stand by my accolades and my respect of the intention of this, and I think this sort of brings out another point that has been underscored by everyone here, and I said this is the beginning of an importantly critical discussion. That there's nothing more important than this discussion, and the leadership of Senators Boscola, Senator Erickson, Senator Argel, all the folks that have signed on as co-sponsors here. I think that that is an essentially good part of this process. This is exactly the way government is supposed to work. We're supposed to have these types of meetings, supposed to have these types of coalitions to address issues, because again, like it has been said so many more times, there is nothing more critical than finding a fair and equitable funding solution to ensure that our children have the best possible opportunities and that taxpayers across the state are not burdened or not treated unfairly at the expense of one group over another. This is the beginning of a very complex and difficult discussion, but I raise these issues, and I'll continue to sort of flesh this out as we move forward. But again, I want to thank the leadership of both sides of the aisle for this today, and thank you for allowing me to have a say. Thank you.
Very quickly, Senator Farnese, as soon as the IFO report identified those Philadelphia issues, I think all of us that were working on the bill said, you're right, that should not have happened. That will be one of the first amendments that we intend to introduce to fix that error. Two of your colleagues have already signed on to the bill. We're hopeful that once we fix that issue, because I understand property taxes are much more of an issue in Philadelphia than perhaps 10 or 20 years ago. Once we fix that, we'd love to have the other 5 senators from the city join us. But thank you. You're absolutely right. We need to fix that. That is an error.
Well, no, and again, I thank you. To me, like they always say, sometimes the devil's sort of in the details. So as you sort of you sort of dig into this, and I have got. We looked at it very closely. My staff looked at it very closely too, and we pointed out. So I appreciate your willingness in that.
Well, folks, once again, just like the swallows returning to Capistrano, the legislature in its infinite wisdom is yet again proposing another bill, presumably to eliminate the property tax, something which I very much support. Having been elected official for 14 years locally in the city of Pittsburgh, and certainly now my 11 years in the state Senate. But as everybody says, and Senator Farnese just pointed out, the devil's in the details. I'm voting to get rid of the property tax, period. The fact of the matter is I preferred the STOP proposal a few years ago, which was to stop taxing our properties, because it focused in explicitly on elimination of the property tax relative to an individual's primary domiciled homestead or farmstead, which I believe is around 3,300,000 properties across the state. To me, it was a much more focused and manageable concept in terms of focusing in on the principle of getting rid of the inequitable, just totally anarchistic process by which we value property. It's not a basic math. I mean, we know through arithmetic that if we have an occupation tax and it's $52, that we don't even need a CPA firm to figure out what that math is, and as well a wage tax, which is a very specific percentage. It's basic math. I could spend hours talking about the horror of the process by which we appraise property, especially individual residential property. I don't even want to go into it because I think everybody generally accepts how morally bankrupt that concept is, and how inequitable. And Allegheny County alone in the last several years has spent over $85 million on so-called consultants, and nobody's still happy with the appraisal system. We have a Supreme Court that's sitting on their darn hands because they're not instituting any uniformity in what is clearly established law and the need for counties to do reassessment. So I say, look, get rid of the whole damn thing. Get rid of the property tax. I'm voting to get rid of the property tax. And if this is the only bill that moves to the end of the voting process, I'm voting for it, even though I still have reservations about what it's going to do in terms of relieving corporations and businesses from paying the property tax. And I have concerns about what the bottom line dollar is that will be generated. And I'm still trying to figure out the math of what is the replacement revenue. And again, everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And I have a feeling that with all these illustrious lobbyists here today representing very important institutions, you know, I'm not sure where this bill is going to go. I don't know if it's a placebo offered by beginning with the Republican majority that once again in response to the outrage from residents, especially the older property owners, this is their way of forwarding and proffering some type of resolution. I hope that's not the case. I hope we're really seriously going to deal with the elimination of the property tax. But bottom line, I'm getting rid of the damn property tax. If this is the only thing that comes up for a final vote, I'm voting for it. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out that Representative Cox is here, and you're actually taking the lead on this legislation in the House. Would you like to say something?
Thank you, Senator. I'm honored to be here today as part of this. I know it's not the norm to have a House member come over and speak on a piece of legislation. This is not, I can answer the Senator's question in a nutshell. This is not a placebo offered by anyone. This issue, I have personally been working on this issue for going on 10 years now. Back in 2003 was one of the first versions of this and the first germinations, if you will, of this concept. Representative Scavello and some others in the House got together with Representative Rohr, and the approach came from a desire to finally get rid of a tax that is burdening our residents so much that it is driving some of them out of their homes. And so as we've been moving this thing, you know, around the House for the last 10 years now, I'm thrilled to see that the Senate is showing the leadership to address the issue, and I'm thrilled that a joint hearing like this is taking place. I hope that the discussion continues. For years, the discussion wasn't happening. For years, it was, we don't like the plan, go away. It's not going to work. We now have some seriously aligned groups and individuals, some senators taking the lead on this, Senator Argall, Senator Boscola, Senator Erickson, others, who are willing to continue to try to really dig into this issue, really try to understand how we can take a concept and move it to reality, as Senator Furlow is begging for. Yes, there's going to be questions. We have questions about every piece of legislation that comes through the House or the Senate. We have concerns. Those concerns are always addressed. Concerns about the transportation package that was just passed. We saw those wait over the course of several months, and yet when the will of the legislature was to pass a transportation package, it came about. And so I'm hoping that this initiative that appears to be beginning in the Senate, picking up where I've left off in the House, so to speak. I've been trying to make the issue occur and get debated in the House. It's not something that is easy to come by, but I'm hoping that here in the Senate we can move on that momentum and move on the interest that our constituents still show. I do disagree that this is, someone stated that this is not an issue that's, you know, problematic around the state. I get emails from all over the state. Because of my position on this issue, I get emails from all over the state. And it's not just seniors. It's not just those who are on fixed incomes. It's middle-class families who have their kids in public school. They're willing to pay their share of providing for school funding, but they feel like they're paying way more than their fair share. There are some middle-aged families that don't even have any children. Husband and wife are working, their property taxes, they bought their dream home with a decent amount of acreage, their property taxes are driving them out of their home, even with both of them working. They have done the math. People who do the math, people who sit down and figure it out on a personal level, businesses included. And I would like to challenge any of you up at the table here, we have an organization, the Pennsylvania Realtors, who sits at the table today. For years, we heard from individual realtors all across the state, smaller local realtor organizations across the state, and it was through a series of constant interaction with their local groups and with their local members that the realtors began to take a closer and closer and closer look at this and finally said, you know what, we really need to tackle this. I would humbly ask that those of you in the chamber and those of you who represent smaller constituent bodies, ask the question of what this would mean to all of your members, especially a group like the NFIB who stands to benefit from this. I mean, I can't imagine that every single member of the NFIB has a storefront that they're renting and that they wouldn't see a direct impact here. I imagine there are quite a few members of NFIB who operate out of their basements or their home, and so having a tax eliminated on their home office, if you will, would help them tremendously. I would ask that you reach out to your members and do a survey, as I know you so often have done in the past. This issue has to move forward. I'm not going to let it up on the House, and based on what I've heard here today, I don't get the sense that the Senate is going to let up on it too easily. So please, I'm making an impassioned plea. Please come to the table. This issue needs to move forward. Thank you.
Great. We're going to wrap this up. Does anybody have any last-minute suggestions? Just food for thought here. You know, I think this property tax is just like the holy grail of taxes. If you think about it, say you don't pay your property taxes. I think it's the only tax that you don't pay. Like if you don't pay your earned income tax, there's a lien on your property. But if you don't pay your property taxes just 1 year, it triggers a sale. So you could have been paying your taxes, your property taxes, for 20 years. And then all of a sudden, 1 year, you can't pay your $5,000 and you lose your home. This is why this tax is so unfair. And when I tell people that, like I never thought of it. Any other tax, you get a lien. This one automatically triggers a sale. It's ridiculous. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, please, Jean.
Senator, thank you. Very quickly, just to expand on something I said before, look, we're all highly sympathetic to this. As Senator Erickson knows, I spent 10 years as a local government official in his home county. It was many years ago, but even then I know property taxes were a problem. My concern is this. As we talk about this, I'm very concerned when we talk about the things that we need to do to address the reason why property taxes are high. And yes, I would agree, with all due respect to Mr. Callahan, that we probably have too many school districts in this Commonwealth. That does increase the amount that we have to spend. I'm concerned from a medical perspective, as an analogy, that we're going to treat the symptoms. Rather than go out, why are property taxes high? We're going to treat the symptoms and simply take that too high burden and shift it over to other folks. And I know the comment was people are very happy when they hear my property taxes are gone. The next question is, should ask, what am I going to pay in lieu of? And I think when somebody gets that higher personal income tax bill or pays a tax on a product that they never had to pay before, I think people will tend to think a little bit more about that. So I'd ask you to think about those type options, and I think people would view this differently if they understand what they would have to pay. I know from our perspective, or from the perspective of Pennsylvania, we've tried other options. For example, gaming was supposed to help. We're still seeing those issues. Where I live, we have roughly doubled the local income tax in order largely to pay for schools. Obviously, that hasn't done anything for my property taxes either. So you could argue that, well, geez, maybe that needs we have to go the complete opposite way. I think what we need to do is look at the symptoms that we believe are driving what we all believe are too high property taxes.
Thank you. I do have one question, with your indulgence. Mr. Barr, I've heard you say it and a couple others have said it, let's get control of the spending. I know that's been some of the organization's position, let's control the spending. If any of your organizational members had an employee who was out there spending too much, you wouldn't send them to financial counseling first. and then take away the company credit card or take away the use of the petty cash box. You would take away the ability for them to spend. That is one of the things we are doing. If you listen to the analysis that was provided by Mr. Horowitz and some others, is that we are reining in the amount of money they are able to spend. We are cutting up the credit card. And so we're not treating the symptom without also addressing the fact that the spending is too much. We are only allowing the amount of funding to go to the schools that is permitted by the rate of inflation. And that in itself is one of the, people on one side will say, oh, you're cutting school spending. People on the other side will say, you are saving taxpayers millions upon millions of dollars. And so depending on your viewpoint, we are doing both. Schools are going to receive less, but they're going to receive more in line with what the economy will allow. And that in and of itself, and I'd ask that you take a really close look at those numbers, the amount of money being driven out to the schools is controlling the spending significantly from what prior years have shown. Thank you.
Yes, Representative, we absolutely will do that. But again, it is shifting the burden, and with this oncoming locomotive of the pension issue that we have, I have a hard time believing that we're going to be able to limit those.
I also serve on the Business Advisory Council for the Council on State Taxation that talks about national sales taxations amongst multiple states. In the cost letter, and we agree with this, that there needs to be a study done. We've heard what happens in 3.5 years, and there's, either there's a surplus or a deficiency, and we're throwing all these numbers around. I'm more concerned about my 8-year-old daughter. In 15 years from now, because what we do here today has a lasting impact. I mean, this is a 100-year-old tax, all right? This is going to be around for a long time. We have an aging demographic, and that demographic, if we're shifting the burden, the tax burden, that's not going to go away from that aging demographic to the working family and businesses, we need to know what it looks like 15 years from now. We need to know what this looks like 20 years from now. We're married to this. This is a long-term thing, and with this rapidly aging demographic, it's going to have a monstrous change in spending and habits on a macroeconomic perspective. So what does that look like in 20 years? When my daughter graduates from college, what's the economic climate going to be in Pennsylvania? Or am I going to have to move to another state just to be with my daughter because she's not going to want to be here? She wants to start a business. She's 8. She's got the bug. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I'm guilty as charged. But I'm worried about that. Cost has got it right. We need to take it slowly. They're asking for a study. We have a voluntary sales tax system. It's voluntary. Okay? We have trouble with compliance issues, nexus issues. Today, we have this difficulty in navigating this. Last year, acknowledging the click-through nexus. Now, the way the administration has chosen to enforce this expanded definition of sales tax is fine. The business community doesn't have a problem with that. But this expanded interpretation of the law could have unintended consequences over the long term. As a matter of fact, Cost, when they were aware that the department, without a formal affiliate nexus statute, expanded the definition, had some serious questions. They're like, how could you expand this definition without a formal affiliate nexus statute? What about all the unintended consequences? The unintended consequences were never contemplated. This takes all of those issues, those micro issues, and expands those issues into so many areas of complexity. It's unbelievable. I think Cost has got it right. Slow down. Let's do the appropriate study. Let's see what this demographic, the effect of this aging demographic 20 years from now has on the sales, on the tax system. And then there's a second point, and it's very important. The fact that we're here and people are painfully paying a tax that they're struggling to do, that means the tax system's working. You know what? That's great, because what this bill would do is alleviate the pain. And when we alleviate the pain of school funding, Now, all of a sudden, we're not talking about this issue of how we're spending the money anymore because everybody's feeling good. Now, all of a sudden, we've put a Band-Aid on this, right? We've alleviated the pain, and now people aren't talking about the spending. I'm not so sure that from a tax policy perspective, angry taxpayers, because this is driven by spending. The angry taxpayer thing isn't necessarily the check. It's the amount of the check. It's how the money's being spent. Putting a Band-Aid on that takes that pain away, and now people aren't complaining about this anymore, and we're going to get more of the same. I think cost has it right. I think the long-term study is appropriate. I think we need to look at this aging demographic over the long term. 3 or 4 years isn't enough.
I'll just make one quick comment, Senators. When it comes to this issue, I want to say this is not, from PSBA's point of view, this is not the search for more money on this issue. This is, quite frankly, if you talk to your school board members, and I encourage you to do so, I know you all do, over the past 3 or 4 years, every one of them have had to make cuts to their budgets and control costs. Now, the problems, of course, I don't want to go into all of them because I don't think we have time right now, is how they've had to do that has been very limited by statute, and then by, I could go into economic furloughs, I can go into a few other instances where you're very limited on how you can control your school budget costs. There's been some very painful decisions on, having to let go of arts programs and the like, because that's potentially sometimes the only thing that's on in your budget that you can control. So there are very painful decisions that have been made on controlling cost, and those decisions have been done, and I would like everybody to talk to your school boards. You know them. You've seen those painful cuts over the past years, and very decisions that have been very difficult. But I think on the cost side of this, there's been a lot of movement to control cost within schools.
I know that we've tried to tweak the system before. Some of you had talked about, a mix of taxes is a good thing. When Governor Casey attempted to not eliminate the property tax, but reform it, it was the worst defeat for a constitutional question in the history of Pennsylvania. And so I think there was the genesis of the idea that we ought not to tweak this tax. We ought to drive a stake through its heart so it could never, ever, ever come back. Because the voters of Pennsylvania don't believe us if we say, well, we're going to give you a freeze or a temporary decrease. They want the thing killed. And so that's why in the public opinion research that the realtors had offered, voters said, yes, this is what we want. And it's a major shift. There's no doubt about it. It's increasing sales. It's increasing income. We're talking about $10, $11, $12 billion. You don't do that with a new tax on bubble gum. And I think this idea that our goal is to not hurt the public schools, but to get them a dollar-for-dollar replacement on their current system. Now, my kids have both done very well at a public school that was not a wealthy school. Tamaqua, for God's sakes, is not a wealthy school district. They've both graduated from some of the best universities in the state, and God help me, we're about to have our first lawyer in the family because my son just got accepted at Harvard Law. And so I know that our public schools can produce. We want to continue that. But I think a dollar-for-dollar replacement with a cost of living adjustment is very fair. I don't see that as draconian at all.
There we go. First, I want to remind everyone on the panel that not everyone would benefit from this bill, and not everyone is going to save money from this. In fact, this is really a shift from low-income working families that don't own property to wealthy homeowners. The reality is that somebody who owns a $500,000 house and pays $20,000 in property taxes will benefit, and they will pay nothing. Some increase in income taxes, but certainly the people that clean their houses are not getting that property tax relief and instead are simply paying the higher property income taxes and sales taxes. The bill also would raise $1 billion, more than $1 billion, according to the IFO, from food. So while there are some exceptions to it, the reality is that you're increasing food prices, again, for people who don't have much money. So it's not, it certainly has some implications, and just as it has implications for cost shifts on businesses, it does on individuals. Let me say second that there are two dialogues going on here. One is about addressing people's concerns about property taxes, and one is about addressing people's concerns about education spending. And there's probably a lot more agreement about doing something about property taxes than there is. I would say that there are dramatically different points of view about whether or not we're spending enough money on education and where we're spending it. So that is a worthy debate. I think the conversation here about funding formulas and, in fact, how much we need to spend are worthwhile conversations. So I'm going to go back to the property tax discussion because I wanted to lay out 4 potential solutions that I would encourage you to consider before eliminating property taxes. One was raised here was fixing the assessment system. We should just go to a statewide assessment system. There should be a statewide assessor, and that should get done. It's a political problem. It really, many of the concerns were around the inequities in assessments. I think there are other proposals that could immediately address concerns about high property taxes. For seniors, there's property tax deferral programs. We could easily expand the property tax rent rebate program, raise the income level. I agree with Jean Barr that if you give everyone property tax relief with a small amount of money, you don't end up giving people enough. So you could certainly do that. Other states have implemented something called a property tax circuit breaker, which is not just for seniors but also for others, and essentially means that once your income taxes hit a certain level as a share of your own personal income, you get property tax relief. So if you lose your job and all of a sudden you can't afford your house anymore, you'd be eligible for that benefit. And let me say, means testing means a lot of things. New Jersey has a property tax circuit breaker program. Families are eligible up to about $100,000. So it really can solve a wide swath of the problems. And then I think the other thing that could be done is to use a funding formula to drive out property tax relief to school districts, because there's 2 ways to do property tax relief: to individuals, which I think is the best way, but also there are some places, Carbon County in the Poconos, some places in Berks County, where they have high property taxes, and you could use a funding formula to actually provide additional state dollars to those school districts to actually lower their property taxes. Again, these are targeted. This is not getting rid of the hated property tax, which I think folks here have indicated there are some concerns about, but really trying to address the problem in a different way.
Quick, and it's just I think this is to Mr. Callahan, John. Can you explain why student population has gone down over the past decade in this state, while school employment has gone up? And secondly, even when the state gave more money in funding to our schools, and our funding that has risen, but at the same time, so did property taxes go up. And if you look at the IFO report, and I forget what page it is, it shows the scale of the rise of property taxes over the past decade. I mean, you have the cost of living, and you have these indicators way down here, and yet property taxes continue to rise. Now, with just 25 to maybe 30% of federal, state, and local taxes reaching into the classroom, how much longer do you think the taxpayers will be able to burden these tax burdens? I mean, it's getting to the point where, and I think what this bill does, and this bill, in all honesty, what I'm hearing from some of you folks that are opposing this is that this bill just came on, that it hasn't been vetted. This bill has been vetted far better than the transportation bill we just did. I mean, that is without question. This bill has been vetted better than any bill that I've ever had the pleasure of supporting in trying to reach a bipartisan, least burdensome solution to this antiquated way that we fund our schools. And yes, with any tax that's above 0%, there will be some winners and losers. But that person, Mrs. Ward, that owns the $500,000 home and pays $20,000 in taxes, you tell me he's not out buying a BMW? Or you tell me he's not out buying the latest in clothing and so forth? That they're spending. We're just looking to spread, rather than shrinking the pool, which that's all I'm hearing up here, is that the possible solutions going forward is, well, we'll give seniors this break, and not that they don't deserve it, and farmers don't deserve it. I don't want to become like New Jersey. They tax their farmers out of existence. They used to be the garden state. They don't grow anything anymore. It's because we tax those farmers off the farms. And at least Clean and Green has saved our farmers. And I think Joel can testify to this. We spend tens of millions of dollars a year in farmland preservation. What if we just allow our farmers to be profitable? They will not only stay on the farm, but they will farm it. And quite frankly, I like to eat 3 times a day. So, and local product to boot. So this bill has been vetted. We try to put the cost controls in keeping education costs with the rate of inflation compared to population growth. We want to continue to talk about it. We'll meet with each and every one of you on the possible solutions. I've already talked to Senator Argel about that. I will put together for Judy a funding commission, and as long as I can get the other support from my colleagues, to look at the general education funding formulas to make them fair. I don't know what else to do. I just know that we have an opportunity to do something historic, and I don't think it's done halfway. And I think we'll keep people young. To Warren, to your point, we'll keep young people in this state because they will want, because with this and other things that we should be doing to make the state more business friendly, this would be a great, it's like property tax elimination be one of the fingers, right to work would be another finger, getting our spending under control and requiring our government to live within its means. These could be all fingers that we can make a fist to make this state great again and attract those companies. Because really, what we're talking about here is simply this. We are running out of other people's monies. And all the talk about the budgeting and the lack of funding for education and so forth is simply because we're running out of other people's monies. So I just think that this is in a long term, I think this is actually a pro-business bill and to keep people in Pennsylvania. So it's been vetted. We're looking for the solutions. We'll meet with you. We'll continue to vet it. But I don't think there has been a bill that has been vetted more than this bill and talked about more than this bill. I think we're just afraid. And, it was just December 7th, the day of infamy, when we went to World War II, and Roosevelt made that famous statement, said, the only thing we have to fear is the fear itself. And I think that's really what we're looking at here. And we, as any bill, can always be changed, and we can always make adjustments. So I'm sorry.
And also about the School Boards Association, I have talked to some school board members, and I do point out that whenever you go to a personal income tax, there's an automatic built-in adjustment, because every time somebody gets a raise or a cost of living adjustment, because of the personal income tax, the school district's going to get money every year, more money, because when you get a raise or a cost of living, they automatically get a chunk of that money, and I thought that would be good. And some school board members said, you know what, you might be right, then I don't have to vote to raise property taxes all the time. That's why we're not trying to defund education and not fund it correctly. I think it's fair to say if you go to a personal income tax and a sales tax and you're getting automatic multiplier in there every time somebody gets a raise and a cost of living adjustment, we're trying to give more money to the schools to do the job that they need to do to educate our kids. It's more than fair. Senator Farnese.
Yeah, and I'll thank you, Senator Brascola. You could tell when Senator Brascola wants to wrap things up. She is. You don't want to get on her bad side. So but I did hear Senator Argel made a very, very good point right after he made the comment that and as a lawyer, now that I'm happy that he will become the parent of a new lawyer someday. Lots of fun ahead there. But he did say something I think is critically important, and I think that it was an issue that was mentioned earlier, but I hope it gets the attention that it rightfully deserves, because it is, again, it is wrapped up in this issue of the property taxes. He made a very, very good point. He said that, we're trying to find a dollar-for-dollar replacement for the current system. I agree with that, but Many of us believe that the current system is not fair. It's broken. We talked about the funding formula, and that is why I believe it is critically important. It is essential that the funding formula, the way that we look at the way our schools are funded across the state, we have to address that issue. Senator Swank made a point about this, and I 100% agree with her. We have to address both of these issues, I believe, at the same time. I think we are making a grave mistake by trying to separate this and taking one at a time. I think these two issues are intertwined. I think everybody up here has talked about the same exact thing. Education, education, giving our children the best opportunities and making sure the system is fair and equitable across the Commonwealth. Well, we have to address within that conversation the way that we fund our schools, the funding formula that goes along with that. I think it's, along with our I would agree with Senator Boscola, along with our taxing system, which is archaic, I think our funding formula is long, long overdue since, as someone said, 1993. Let's not lose focus of that. Let's try to accomplish these two tasks at the same time. I mean, people have said it before. We can multitask up here. This is a great opportunity to do that.